candidate for Secretary of State, Robert Sprague.
Thank you very much, Shannon. It's great to be here with all of you. I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, have you been paying attention to what's happening in Greenland? Have you seen what's happening in Argentina? All right. Have you seen what's happening in Venezuela? All these places. How about Iran? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you the truth. The enemy is at the gate. The problem is the Democrats decided to let the enemy through the gates. And ladies and gentlemen, this is what is at stake in the next election. We have got to fight it. Greenland is really about great power struggles. And if you think for 1 second that Russia, who's willing to spend billions of dollars against us on the battlefield, is not willing to spend millions to try to infiltrate our voting system in the state of Ohio, you are sorely mistaken. So, given these great power struggles, what do we do to secure our elections here in the state of Ohio? Well, let me tell you, I spent years installing accounting systems at some of the largest companies on the face of the earth. And one of the first things that any corporation, whether it's a Fortune 500 company or a small business, wants to know is how are we going to prevent fraud? How do we make sure that our financial records are safe and that we're not spending money or people are stealing money from us? I want to take that private sector fraud fighting experience and put it to work for you to fight voter fraud here in the great state of Ohio. Here's how we do it. First, we move to an upfront citizenship check, ladies and gentlemen. We will make sure that only American citizens can vote in our Ohio elections. The second piece is, if you want to prevent fraud, you got to deal with the registration database. There's two big security issues with the election system in the state of Ohio. And the first has to do with the registration database. Now, you know the way that we deal with fraud in the private sector is we do what's called an audit. Anybody ever been through an audit before? Okay, right? We have an audit. Matter of fact, in the treasurer's office, we have an auditor by the name of Keith Faber. Keith comes in and looks at my books as the state treasurer. We are going to create an internal audit department, the first of its kind for a Secretary of State's office, to begin to clean up the voter rolls here in the great state of Ohio. And we will take the fake people and the dead people and the people that have moved away off the voter rolls here and make sure that the Democrats and our enemies are not able to vote those records. Here's the third thing we're going to do. We're going to move to all paper ballots in every election in the great state of Ohio in every single county. Why? Because when you use a separate piece of printed paper ballot, when you use a separate printed paper ballot, it gives you what? A perfect and immutable audit trail. And we can go back and we can count the paper to make sure that the machines are telling us the truth. And we will go back and count the paper to keep the machines honest. So, the fourth thing that we are going to do, in addition to using all paper ballots in every election for the great state of Ohio, is we will also make sure that we do the counting afterwards. Not only do we do an audit to make sure that the count is accurate, we're also going to do a count and an audit to make sure that the bipartisan chain of custody is never violated for your vote here in the state of Ohio. Now listen, my opponent, Marcel Sturbridge, he wants to allow every county in the state of Ohio to do their own hand count of ballots. That way they can count the ballots after election night at 7:30. They can bring in thousands of volunteers and they can hand count the ballots. Think that sounds like a good idea? Yes. It's going to be like Atlanta, Georgia, ladies and gentlemen. Have you seen a picture of Atlanta, Georgia, them doing the recount by hand? You got all these people stuffed into a room. The shades come down. There's no transparency. You got ballots lying around that have been out of the chain of custody for people, uncounted, sitting there for a day or 2 days. At the end, they're not even going to be sure exactly what the count was, and they'll have to recount it. We won't know what the election is until a long time later. And that's going to be a problem not just for the accuracy of the election, but also for your belief in the accuracy of the election. We do not want to have Atlanta, Georgia, here in the state of Ohio, ladies and gentlemen. Here's our professional audit plan. The night of the election, we run the ballots through the tabulation machine. They scan those votes. We immediately know who won and who lost, and the total number of people who voted. They give that to their local secretary or their local board of elections, who then sends it to the Secretary of State office, and then we have an immutable record of how many people voted. The following day, we send down professional auditors that are able to count the vote and make sure that it's 100% accurate. That's how we will get elections right here in the great state of Ohio. So I just want to close with this. I'm reading this book by John Meacham called Let There Be Light. And Then There Was Light, sorry. And it's about Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln is entering the stage. You know, he's the father of the Republican Party. And he is about to take on Douglas, who is the state, also running for the United States Senate in Illinois. And Douglas was an avid slave state proponent. And Abraham Lincoln is trying to take him on in this debate. And he goes back not to the Constitution of the United States with the 3/5 compromise, but he goes further back as the basis of his argument to the Declaration of Independence. And that's what I want to do with you here tonight, is to think about those words that Thomas Jefferson penned and that prelude to the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that governments are instituted among men to secure those rights, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Ladies and gentlemen, ultimately, the Secretary of State's office is not about running an election. It's about you being able to transmit your consent and the will of the people of the state of Ohio to be able to control your government at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. And I will fight for you to make sure that your will is transmitted in every single election here in the great state of Ohio. Robert Sprague, running for Secretary of State. Thank you so much for your attention and time. Appreciate it.
So, how long have you been treasurer?
I've been treasurer now for 7 years.
So why haven't you fixed the, my God, all the things wrong with the people that are doing the fraud in Ohio? Why haven't you fixed that yet in 7 years?
You're talking about what fraud? The Somali fraud or what?
Absolutely, all of it.
Well, so we have a separately elected treasurer, and we have a separately elected auditor, and a separately elected governor. And the way the structure of government is set up is, why am I a separately elected treasurer? You know why? So that you, the people, can recall me if I'm stealing money from the state. That's why. And it's the auditor's job to go in and audit the rolls of every single state agency, including mine, to make sure that we're not taking money. And it's my job to cut checks to whoever the executive says is allowed to be paid by the people of the state of Ohio and the Ohio Treasury.
So do you guys talk to each other?
I don't appropriate the money. The General Assembly appropriates the money. And then the governor creates contracts with vendors or employs people to spend that money to accomplish the will of the General Assembly, which is an assembly of the people of the state of Ohio have elected representatives to for every 2 years to create the General Assembly. So in the Treasurer's office, we are very sensitive to people stealing money out of our $25 billion portfolio, or illegally processing checks or taking money from our LGIP, our local government investment pool, or our investments, or from the teachers or the firefighters in the pension systems. But what we cannot do is go out and audit the daycare centers. I'm not authorized to do that, and I have no power under the Ohio Constitution to do that. And let me say that if everybody did their job and followed the rule of law, we wouldn't be having a lot of these problems in our country and in the United States of America. So what I will do, and my commitment to all of you, and what I have done as state treasurer, is to follow the law and do my job.
I still say you haven't done it in 7 years. You haven't talked to any of those people to work on getting rid of the fraud. Yeah, okay.
Well, I have a question. So, will you help me, Rob and Vivek, get rid of the teachers' unions? Because we hate them. They're corrupt. They're fraudulent. They're hurting our children. They're destroying our public education. If you become Secretary of State, will you help me get rid of the teachers' unions?
I wish I could do that, Hannah, or Hillary, as part of the Secretary of State's office. I don't
We
think
can
it's.
figure it out.
I don't think it's part of the role, but I'll tell you what. I remember going down to Columbus. In the first week I was there, everybody was all up in arms about this thing called Senate Bill 5. I don't know if you remember that. Anybody remember Senate Bill 5? No, everybody's forgotten about it. Okay. I've still got scars on my back from Senate Bill 5. All right? And that was the bill that we passed in the General Assembly when I was there to eliminate a lot of the public sector unions. And I remember sitting in this conference room, and I know nothing, all right? I'm from little old Findlay, Ohio, and I came down here. So I'm in the conference room, and I'm looking out the window, and they keep talking about OEA this and OEA that. And I have no idea what the OEA is. And I look through this conference room window, and there is a 8-story building that has the OEA letters on it. And I'm like, the OEA is like, the teachers union, do they have their own building? They said yes. And let me tell you, I think that a lot of what they do, unfortunately, is they advocate for the teachers. They don't advocate for the kids. And we need people in our system that are willing to advocate for our children.
Thank you for coming. I know that you've accused Marcel Sturbich of saying there's going to be chaos in the counting. There's a lot of boomers in this room, and we remember when we counted in the precincts, in the voting places, and we knew that night. You keep saying that you are for paper ballots. Does that mean that you're in favor of replacing voting machines in favor of pre-printed, hand-marked paper ballots like Marcel Sturbich and President Trump have called for?
Look, I firmly believe that you want to have a separate paper ballot that gives you an idea of who, not an idea, you know exactly who you voted for, and it creates an immutable audit trail. You should have that piece of paper in your hand. You should submit it to a locked box that's guarded by both a Republican and a Democrat. If it's pre-printed, I like that idea. I like the watermarks that Donald Trump has said. But the key thing is that it's a separate piece of paper that you know exactly who you voted for and you submitted to that box. Later on that evening, they take the Democrat and the Republican at the precinct level, take those ballots out, they send them through an optical scanner. The optical scanner tabulates the vote. They submit that vote to the local board of elections and up to the Secretary of State's office. And we have an immutable audit trail as to how many votes were cast. And we also have those ballots under custody, and then we can go back and we can audit them the following day to make sure that the vote count is accurate and that the machines are not rigged.
Do you know that the voting thing that's done is not the names that you say, yes, I voted for this person, it's the votes in the barcode which Dominion has set up?
I think that some of the votes, it depends on the machine. Some of them do read the barcode. Others optically scan. And the optical scan is the gold standard, and we will move toward an optical scan of the votes here in the state of Ohio.
Hi, thank you for coming. Frank LaRose cleaned up the voter rolls last June. So you had mentioned that you want to clean them up further. Did he not do a good job, or what do you need to do to further clean up those rolls?
Well, last June, certainly the voter rolls are being cleaned up, but there's more work to be done. And you will see that there have been referred to prosecution people that are illegally here, and not only have illegally registered to vote, but they voted in Ohio elections. And there's more that has to be done on this issue. The key problem with all of this is twofold. The first is access to the data. In the state of Ohio, in many cases, the BMV has a knowledge of who's a citizen and who's not, but they don't always keep a clear record. And if that record's not clear in the database, then we're unable to match it to what they submitted as a voter. The second issue is ultimately the people that know who are citizens and who are not citizens is the federal government. And under Joe Biden, they didn't let us have access to the systematic alien verification for entitlements database. They didn't let us have access to other BMV data. They didn't let us have access to the Social Security Administration database. We need access to all of those databases, and I think the Secretary of State's office is moving in that direction, but I think that more needs to be done to ensure the integrity of the voter registration database.
So the back of a Ohio driver's license should have a notation if a person is a non-citizen on the back. So are you saying, how are you going to fix that to make sure that those driver's licenses automatically say non-citizen? And to also piggyback on that, giving driver's license tests in different languages. Why are we giving driver's license tests in different languages here in Ohio?
I don't know why we're giving driver's license tests in different languages. I will tell you with regards to a non-citizen having a driver's license, they should never be allowed to register to vote in the state of Ohio.
You said about the fraud, when somebody asked about the question of all the money that was given to fraud, you said that you are, as a treasurer, are not responsible for checking the businesses to examine fraud. I do believe in the office that you are running for, which is Secretary of State, that's where that authority comes. So how would you mitigate this problem in your new office? And you would then be sending it by the trail that you said up to Frank LaRose in the auditor's office.
Well, yes, thank you for that question. You know, the role of the Secretary of State, I think you're referring to in these businesses, is that you incorporate a new business in the Secretary of State's office. Now, when you incorporate a new, I don't know, how many people have started a business in this room? All right, me too. All right, and so when you first file your business, are you committing fraud before you start the business? How do you know if you're committing fraud before you start the business? Starting the business, filing the paperwork is the first thing I did as an entrepreneur. I didn't have a single customer. I didn't have a single payroll yet. I didn't have anything going on in my business. That's when I register at the Secretary of State's office. So it's very tough to find fraud at the very beginning. Now, when you find fraud is what people do within their business. What people do within their business. And that's where the governor's office, the attorney general, and the auditor's office come into play to make sure that these people are doing the right thing. If they are committing fraud, they need to be held to the full extent of the law, and they need to be prosecuted. And we need to be able to get that money back for the taxpayers of the state of Ohio. So with regards to the Secretary of State's office, what I would like to see us do in the business filings aspect is every single entrepreneur that's ever filed for a new business, you know the one thing they need right out the gate? They need money. And we've got all these programs at the state level, at the federal level, the SBA, even at the local level to try to help small businesses. Here's what I'd like to do in the Secretary of State's office. When you go and you register in the Secretary of State, your small business, I'd love to have an AI interface, an artificial intelligence interface, that automatically tells what type of business you're trying to start up and can connect you with all these programs and potential financing to help you be successful as a small business here in the state of Ohio. That's something that I think could be quite useful right out of the gate. It would help people be successful in their entrepreneurship goals.
I think the Somalis have already figured that out. I don't think they need more money. I think they need the Secretary of State job to watch for all the fraud ways that they've done multiple businesses.
Good evening. My name is Barbara. I'm a resident of Strongsville. Mr. Sprague, thank you for coming to our city. I have a question and I need clarity, please. You mentioned regarding the voting, protecting that you would do something about optical identification. Am I accurate?
Optical scanning.
Optical scanning. What does that entail? 'Cause
I'm
it's
talking
kinda-
about,
It's kind of creepy to me. And I
Yeah.
know about the mark of the beast.
Sure.
So this, yeah.
I understand. I think what I am proposing is that as the ballots go through the machine, so it would be just like a scanner on a printer, they'd be able to see that the bubble is filled in to be able to record the vote. So not any sort of an optical scan of someone's eye or facial recognition technology.
I'm still confused. How do you do an optical scanning to identify the voter without what you just said?
Oh, no, I don't. So I don't want to use an optical scanning machine to identify the voter. You simply have to show your photo ID, your driver's license when
Yeah.
you go to vote at the polls, and that will remain. But I will tell you, one of the things that I am for is let's get rid of the mail-in ballots. Let's declare Election Day a holiday, and we could go back to the way it was in Ohio for the prior 200 years, where everybody showed up in person to vote.
Okay.
And you reserve those precious mail-in ballots for the people that have valid excuses. In 2005, Republicans changed it to make it no-fault absentee voting, and now we submit almost 1 million ballots through the mail. Let's go back to the way it was before, where everyone has to show up in person and show your photo ID to be able to vote here in the great state of
Now
Ohio.
you're talking. Thank you.
But no optical scanning of people.
All right, I have one more question to kind of go back on the fraud and starting a business. I've owned a business in Ohio, and at one point I actually owned 3 businesses at a time. But what I am noticing with the fraud is that a lot of these fraudsters, you say you don't start a business with fraud, but the fraudsters do start a business with fraud in mind. And I've noticed there's not a lot of checks and balances, because when people start opening 20 businesses at a time, maybe that's something that the Secretary of State should look at. Why do they have 21 businesses and 12 of them aren't operating? Or even 19, 18 of them aren't operating? So what are you going to do with these people who are opening multiple businesses that do have fraud in mind?
Thank you.
They
That's-
do. They open them with fraud in mind. Yeah, I didn't. I did it with in mind of making money. But there are people that have it in mind to open with fraud. And I can give you the name of one guy right now that has 21 businesses.
Very good. No, I understand that point. Thank you. I appreciate that. I do think it's the responsibility of government to keep track of taxpayer dollars, but we've got to do that in accordance with the law. And the reality is that some of you right here that are sitting right here have multiple businesses that are opened up in your names, multiple LLCs or multiple C corporations. And it's not the government's job to police all of that, but it is our job to make sure that your tax dollars are being spent well and that fraud is not occurring. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Robert Sprague. Thank you, Robert.